Hey, Hard Trades. Today we are going to discuss how to nail an interview, how to make sure that when you interview, you are going to increase your odds of landing that job. So, interviewing, gosh, we could talk about interviewing for days, but today let's just scratch the surface, cover the basics, get an idea of what to expect. In the past, maybe you've gone to an interview and it pretty much was if you showed up on time, you got the job offer. But as you progress in your career, making sure you're prepared for your interviews is going to be significantly more important. So, what is an interview? The interview is the second to last step in the job search process. So you interview, then you get the job offer. So many more things come in the job search process before you even get to the interview stage. But an interview is essentially a structured conversation where the interviewer asks questions and the interviewee provides answers. But it's also your opportunity to learn more about the role you applied to. So if you are interviewing, I want you to keep in mind that it is a two-way street. And then I definitely want you to remember when you're in the interview, it's not about what you want, it's about what value you can bring to the company. So I'm going to work with you on how to structure your answers to different questions and what type of questions you should potentially ask an employer. But I definitely, as we go through this, want you to keep it in the back of your mind that when you're interviewing, it's not about you, it's about them. You are a business of one. You are the product. You are trying to market your product to that employer. Remember those trends when we're talking about interviewing. You're the product and your resume is an advertisement. Well, in an interview, same thing. That's that next step in before, the purchase occurs. So sticking with that analogy, I want you to keep that in mind. So when you're dressing for an interview, I don't care what you find comfortable. It's about what's going to make you be professional, look professional to that employer. So in hard trade interviews, there's typically a one-step higher rule. So at a bare minimum, that means to dress one step higher than the role you're applying to. But if you have a well-fitting suit or sports jacket and tie, wear it. You can never, you don't want to wear a tuxedo. That's too overdressed. That's inappropriate. But if you can, look professional, look as professional as possible, as polished as possible. So that means ironing your clothes, cleaning your shoes, making sure you have good personal hygiene, including what a lot of people miss is cleaning underneath your nails. If you're in a hard trade, you probably have dirty nails because that's a part of the job. Well, you need to make sure you clean that when you're on an interview. And then obviously cleaning your body so you don't smell and brushing your teeth. Most of the interviews that are occurring nowadays are virtual, but there's going to be those ones that you are in person. So you want to make sure that you're coming with good hygiene. And part of that is not having overpowering cologne or perfume. If anything, I wouldn't recommend putting it on at all. Sometimes interviews happen in kind of smaller areas. And if you're in a room with somebody who has on really strong cologne or perfume, it's overwhelming and can give you a headache. You don't want to be remembered as that guy who had on too much cologne. You want to be remembered as that guy who was really impressive. And then, of course, your hair. So you want to make sure that your hair there's lots of different types of hairstyles, but whatever type of hairstyle you rock, you want to make sure that it's on point when you're interviewing. So I will add that the caveat to this is typically if you are applying to go into a union, you do want to wear a suit. I have a lot of union friends and a lot of union family members, and I know one of my friends who works for the pipe fitters, when he was working the front desk, if somebody came, because you actually have to go in person, or at least at that time, to get an application to fill it out on site, If you didn't have a suit on, they marked it. They put a big X through your application. If you did not come, dressed to the nine when it came to looking as professional as possible, they wouldn't even consider you to get in. So that's something to take into consideration. Now, this is something that you may, want to talk to your trade instructor about. What are carpentry expectations when applying for a pre-apprentice program? What is bricks expectations? For your brick instructor, I know that you're going to be interviewing with her. That is your interview. Well, when you're interviewing with her, you need to make sure that you're showing her that dedication. It's not just, oh, well, I'm just talking to my instructor. No, you want to take it seriously. Same thing in paint. What does it take? What are their expectations? Your instructors are your mentors. They're going to know what their union expects while you're interviewing. So take their advice serious when they're telling you what their union expects. So this is just a general rule of thumb: clean clothes, clean body, groomed hair. So how else do you prepare for an interview outside of the way you look? So one thing I want to note is that 50% of employers say that within the first 5 minutes of an interview, they know whether or not a candidate will be a good fit for their company. Maybe it's the way you answered that first question, tell me about yourself. Or maybe it's the way that you look. Are you clean or are you not clean? So one of the things that really helps you increase your chances of immediately coming off as a good fit for that company, for that role that you're applying for, is to do that company research, to conduct informational interviews. So an informational interview and company research means that not only are you looking on their company website, if it's a public company, you might look at last quarter's reports that they publish, or you may go on YouTube and find the president of that company doing a podcast. You're getting a feel for what that company is about. Glassdoor.com has lots of reviews. If you just Google it, Googling is gonna come up with tons of different information. So that's how to research the company. But then the next step to researching the company is actually trying to find somebody who works at that company and asking them what it's like. So maybe if you did your hands-on learning, your work-based learning, your internship, whatever it is, however you got that hands-on learning, maybe you reach out to those supervisors and ask them some more questions about their company, if that's a company that you're interested in working for. Maybe it's going on LinkedIn and finding somebody on LinkedIn. Now, I will admit hard trades don't use LinkedIn as often, but you never know. You might find somebody who's active on it. At a bare minimum, you might find somebody who's more on the administrative side who uses it more often. And you might be able to get an insider scoop. So that's all an informational interview is, an insider scoop from somebody who works at the company, where researching the company is more doing like an internet search. So we just talked about, how to dress, but there's more than that when it comes to making a good first impression. If you're not getting a good night's sleep the night before your interview, you're going to have potentially bags under your eyes. You're not going to be on top of your game. So try to get that good night's sleep. We've talked about mindfulness a lot in terms of how to prepare throughout your stay at Job Corps, how to set yourself up for success once you leave Job Corps. Getting a good night's sleep is one of those personal hygiene things that highly successful people do, that we've talked about time and time again. And it matters in your interview as well. Getting that good night's sleep is important. Being early is important. So if you're doing an in-person interview, do a dry run. Make sure you know how to catch that train, bus, or take the car, whatever it may be, to get to the location. And if it's online, set up your setup the night before. Make sure you have a plain backdrop. Make sure the lighting is okay. Make sure that your internet's working, that your camera's working, that the lighting's working. And then have a backup plan. So I've had internet issues all the time, and it's embarrassing. And, if you have to switch over to your phone, have it be fully charged, and make sure that you have it all set up, the link to wherever it is that you're doing that virtual interview. So you can say, I'm so sorry, it looks like I'm having some bandwidth issues on my Wi-Fi. I'm going to switch over to my phone. And then make sure the night before you're setting out clothes. Again, we talked about this. Iron those clothes, wash those shoes. And if it's online, you want to make sure you set up that virtual area. You want it clean. You want it quiet. And yes, you still want to have on professional clothes, even in a virtual interview. And if you are going in person, print off your resume and print off extra copies. So that way, if they haven't seen your resume before, they have the opportunity to see it. So if you Google how to prepare for an interview, there's so much information out there, so many different things that you want to take into consideration. But these are some of the basics. In Google Classroom, you will find a checklist on how to prepare for an interview. I literally just got it from, I downloaded it from the Muse. It's pretty straightforward, but if you're the type of person that likes to have those checklists, likes to have those to-do lists, that resource is in Google Classroom for you. This is just the basics. So now let's get into something a little less basic, different types of interviews. So there's going to be different types of interviews, and due to COVID, different types of interviews are coming more and more common. So traditionally, the type of, the first interview is going to be a quick phone screening. So it might be you just speaking to a recruiter, or you speaking to someone within HR that's just going to make sure that that you meet all of the basic qualifications. So when you're doing that phone screen, make sure you have your resume handy. Make sure you have your company research handy. So if someone calls you, honestly, I don't recommend answering. Let it go to voicemail, see who it is who called, and then call them back. So that way, when you call them back, you can have all that information handy. Those spreadsheets that I have in Google Classroom, I didn't make those for my health. I made them for your success. So when you're doing that company research, before you even decide to apply to a role, you should be doing company research to make sure that's the type of company, excuse me, that's the type of company that you're going to want to work for. Otherwise, it's a waste of your time, and time is valuable. So when you call them back, have all that research that you did. Have a refresher on the job description. Have all that information there so you know what you're talking about. Employers don't like to hear, employers know that if you're on the job search, you're going to be applying at other companies, but when you're speaking to them, that's the only job that matters. So you should have not, oh, wait, which job is this for again? What company is this? No, have everything all laid out, review the job description, review that targeted resume that you applied with, and review that company history that you did, or company research that you did. Now, that's typically the first stage, is a very brief phone screening. And then typically a secondary interview comes up. So that might be a virtual interview via video, where it's going to be really important that you look into the camera. So you're giving eye contact, which is not normal. That's why in class we are going to be practicing this. But a lot of companies are still doing those in-person, one-on-one interviews. And that's where it's going to be important to use examples to demonstrate the skills that you have. So that's you actually going on site and answering these questions in person. And then there's going to be a panel interview. That's where there's going to be multiple people there asking you questions. And that's when it's going to be important that you acknowledge everyone in the room, but that you, when a certain person is asking that question, you answer the question while looking at them. So it's more of an intimate feel, because when it's not one-on-one, it can really feel dry, or your personality may come into question whether or not you would be a good fit. So if it is a panel interview, try to make it more intimate by giving that eye contact to the person who's asking the question. There's also working interviews. So be prepared to complete some kind of sample work. This is very common in hard trade interviews. And then testing is absolutely incredibly common in hard trades. Be prepared to take that basic math quiz. That's something that comes up frequently. And even if you aren't going to go into the union, going to come up frequently. So these are different types of interviews. As we go along, we can get into the more granular details about these types of interviews, but just be aware that there are different types of screenings. In the past, maybe you just had to show up in person, immediately got offered the job. As you progress in your career, it's going to look a little different, and I want you to be prepared for that. So there's different types of interview questions. Standard interview questions are questions to just kind of get to know you a little bit better. So tell me about yourself. So when you're telling someone about the self, I actually have a video that specifically is about tell me about yourself. But maybe you might say, I'm a recent Job Corps graduate where I completed 800 hours in carpentry and obtained my pre-apprentice certificate. I'm really interested in your company because of whatever it may be. I know I would be a good fit because I have a strong work ethic. I show up on time and I have strong foundational skills in this field. So you want to, in the question, tell me about yourself, give a little bit of background about you, say a little bit about your previous experience, and then wrap it up with a pretty red bow and say, this is why I would be a good fit for your company. This is why I want to work for your company. Relate it back to the position you're applying to. Another standard question is, what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness? So when you're talking about your greatest strength, you need to know what you're good at. You need to have that confidence. Confidence, that mindset piece that I keep bringing up as we go along, this is important. So think about things that you can relate back to the job you're applying for. So maybe you might say, my greatest strength is that I'm curious. I love learning how things work, what could make things work better, and learning new things in general. This mindset is important in the industry because there's always something new to learn or a better way of doing something. But then on the flip side, we all have weaknesses, and let's be honest, people love to call out our weaknesses and love to say why, whatever negative thing it may be. But when you're in an interview, you don't want to have it be negative. You want to show that you have a growth mindset and that you can learn, and that you can grow and you can get better. So maybe you might say something like, well, in the past, I've taken disrespect personally. In the past, it has affected my workplace satisfaction, but I realized that about myself, and I have actively worked on not taking things personal. For example, if someone curses at me, I've come to realize their bad mood doesn't have to be my bad mood. So when you're talking about a weakness, don't make it a personality trait. So, because personality traits are often fixed, try to make it something that you can work on. So lots of different things that you can use for strengths and weaknesses. And as we go along throughout the rest of your time here, we're going to think about these things and think about the best way to answer this question in an interview customized to your personality, because it is important to be authentic, to be your true self in an interview, but while being professional. So when I say it's important to be your true self, your authentic self, that doesn't mean you have to put all your business out there. That means you are going to let the interviewer see a little teeny sneak peek of part of yourself that relate to how you would be a good fit for this role. So a different type of, so that was standard questions. Now there's also behavioral based questions. So behavioral based questions are asking you to give an example of something you've done in the past, because what you've done in the past is an indicator of what you will do in the future. So one way to answer behavioral based questions is the STAR method. There's also something called the CAR method, which we can talk about, but the STAR method for me is just a little bit easier for you guys to think about. So STAR, situation, task, action, result. So the situation is to paint a clear picture of the situation. The task is to explain the task at hand. So sometimes in your question, the situation and the task are going to be very, very common. That might even be in the same sentence. And then the action is going to describe what you did in that situation. And then the result is going to be you completing your story. So putting that pretty red bow on that career story by saying what the result was or what you learned from the experience. So you might have saved the company time, money. You might have come up with a new way of doing something. Or you might have totally bombed and you know in the future that this is what you need to do different. So let's go over some answers. So again, behavioral-based interviewing is to assess your character, specifically how you approach situations in the past to understand what you would do again if you were to be hired. So very, very common questions. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with a coworker. So you want to, this is going to happen. You are going to have disagreements. So you want to show your level of maturity. You want to show your thought process when answering this question. So tell me about a time when you had a disagreement with a coworker. Sure. I was on a paint job with one other coworker. He felt that it would get done faster if we didn't tape the edges. Ensuring the job is done right is important for me, so I disagreed with him. I said that if we have to redo the job because it's not done right the first time, we wouldn't have saved time at all. I asked him if there was a reason he was in a hurry, because I think it's important to build rapport and trust with your coworkers. And he explained he has something important to do after work. So I promised him that if we weren't done on time, he could leave and I would finish up on my own. So I created a win-win. So it was a win-win resolution. So see how you had a start, a middle, and an end with that example. And it was an example of in the past. When we're done with this, you're actually going to go on Google Classroom and you're going to print out a career story worksheet, and you're going to think about experiences within your trade at previous jobs, during hands-on learning, work-based learning, your internship, whatever it may be that you have experience in, and think about times in the past that you can use for these behavioral-based questions. So another common question is, tell me about a time a customer had a problem with your quality of work. Ouch. Now that one, you may take a little personal, like, did you freak out, or did you say, no, this work is perfect, or, how did you handle it? So you may not have even had experience in your trade dealing with this. Maybe, because you have that instructor there to help you through things, the quality of work never came into question, or maybe it has. So say related to your trade, you've never had this problem before. Well, relate it back to something else in life. Find a story to answer these types of common questions. So your answer may be, fortunately, I have not had a customer had a problem with my work in this industry, but before I got into tiling, I was working at McDonald's. I had a customer upset because there were pickles on her burger. I apologized to the customer for her error and had the cooks make a new one on the fly. While they were remaking it, I asked her if there was anything else I could do to make it right for her. She was happy with getting the burger remade and thanked me for quickly resolving the issue. So again, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So even if you don't have experience working in that industry with a situation like that, just say that, but then follow up with another example of where you've had that type of situation before. So then there's going to be situational based type of interview questions. These are a little bit different from behavioral based. So this gives you the opportunity to display your approach to a specific scenario and how you would handle it. So this question might sound more like, instead of tell me about, it might say, how would you handle a situation if you and a coworker have a disagreement about work issues? So your answer could be, disagreements happen. I try to understand my coworker's perspective first, and then try to create a win-win situation, because at the end of the day, we both want the same thing, the job done right. Once I had a coworker who wanted to skip taping so he could leave on time. I got to the bottom of why he was in a hurry to leave, and he agreed to stay late and finish the work myself if we couldn't get it done before he needed to leave. So again, you're kind of addressing the statement or the situation that they asked about, but then you tie in, even though this is situational based, you still give an example of a brief career story. Why? Because human beings our brains are wired to appreciate stories. Remember Kobe's 10 rules of life? Become a good storyteller? Well, it applies in interviewing, believe it or not. If you just say disagreements happen, I try to understand my coworkers' perspective and create a win-win situation, that's, yes, it's an okay answer. But if you really want to nail the question, if you really want to get into your dream company, then you need to take your answers to the next level. And all that requires is thinking about career stories and preparation. So another situational based question that you may come across is, what would you do if a customer had a problem with the quality of your work? So very similar to the behavioral based question, but situational. So in this answer, you might say something like this. The customer is always right, so I would make it right for the customer. I would apologize and ask the customer how I could make it right for them. Typically, when you ask someone typically when you ask someone what they want, they ask for less than you would give. Fortunately, I've never encountered this on a work site yet, but I have had an unsatisfied customer at McDonald's on a few occasions. One time in particular sticks out when I had a customer who was in a hurry and ordered a burger with no pickles. But it came out wrong. She notified me of the issue and I told her I could have the cooks quickly remake it. While we waited for it to be remade, I asked her if there was anything else I could do to make this right, and she said no and thanked me. So you're addressing the situation that they asked about, and then you're wrapping it up with that pretty red bow by giving them a quick story. Notice how when I am answering these interview questions, they don't take very long to answer. They're concise, they're brief, they're short, but they answer what was the situation, task, action, and result. So that way, you're viewed as a more polished professional. You're viewed as someone who has a higher level of competency. Speaking of competency, there's competency-based interview questions. This tests if the attributes, knowledge, and behaviors that would lead you to be successful in the job. So one question might be, how comfortable are you reading blueprints? If you say very, that does not tell the interviewer much. Give them an example of how you've used it before to prove that you're very comfortable with reading blueprints. So you might say, we use blueprints at Job Corps all the time. So I know how to read them well and understand what to do next by looking at the blueprint. So this tells the interviewer that not only do you know how to read them, but you understand the purpose of the blueprint is to look at it and have instructions on what to do next on the job. So another competency-based interview question might be, do you consider yourself to be good at math? So in hard trades, math is extremely important. You don't need super complicated math to be able to be effective at a hard trade, but you absolutely need those fundamental foundational math skills for you to be successful. So for this question, it needs to be yes. Math is a necessity of the job. In my training program, my peers would always look to me whenever there was a math question that needed solving on the job. So maybe that's if you really feel confident in math. But what if you don't? The answer still needs to be yes. Math is a necessity at the job. To be honest, math didn't always used to be my strong suit, but at Job Corps, I was able to work on my math scores and was able to increase my foundational math and now consider myself very good at work math, whatever it may be, to reassure the employer that yes, you are good at math. You still want to keep it concise. That means short. You want to stick to the point. Even if you don't really feel comfortable in math, well, that's something that right now, when you're 50% at your TAR, if you know is going to come up in a trade-related interview, you need to really take your academics seriously so you can have this answer be yes. So maybe now that you're 50% through your training program, the answer is no. Well, you need to get it to the point where it's yes. So you need to take that math that your trade instructors are working on you with seriously. And if you're struggling, then you need to work with your academic instructors to really get down to figuring this stuff out. So that way you can focus on the job math. So another competency-based question that is going to come up in your trades all of the time is, are you scared of heights? Painters, gonna have to deal with heights. Carpentry, gonna have to deal with heights. Brick, gonna have to deal with heights. So your answer should be no. And then not only no, but give an example of where you've had to do it. So no, I worked on sites where I was constructing 5-story buildings and had no trouble with height at any point. Okay, so maybe this example won't relate to something you've done here at Job Corps. Or maybe you did get this experience during your hands-on learning. So maybe for you, you might have to say no. During my while I was completing my Job Corps program, we worked on heights all the time. I actually have my scaffolding certification, so I can work at higher elevations. So you can tie it back into even saying like, oh, I actually have a credential in scaffolding, and the whole entire point of a scaffold is to get up higher. Okay, so one more example before we move on. Do you have experience wearing safety equipment and following safety regulations? I think safety is one of the most important things on the job. I always study the safety rules that apply to my work. I am OSHA 30, or in your guys' case, you should be OSHA 30 certified. And I've used a variety of safety equipment, including hard hats, steel-toed boots, and goggles. So make this relevant to what your situation is here at Job Corps. Now, I know OSHA 30, having a whole entire week of safety training is really difficult to get through those videos and can be boring, but every single hard trade employer, whether it's union-based or not, cares about safety. Safety is the #1 initiative. Safety is the difference in being in business and going out of business. You need to take your OSHA training seriously. I don't care if it's boring, you need to figure out a way to get through it. So these are competency-based questions. So remember in the beginning of this, I said interviews are a two-way street, that you're going to be being interviewed and being asked questions by the interviewer, and you're going to be responding as the interviewee. Well, your interview is an opportunity to learn more about the company. Towards the end of the interview, they're probably going to say, do you have any more questions? Well, if you have a question that comes up during the interview, it is appropriate to ask that question then. But definitely you want to have questions at the end of your interview. If you do not have a question at the end of your interview, it is a sign you are not interested in working for that company. Not all questions are good questions. Let me say that again. Not all questions are good questions. If you have questions prepared, you may want to run them by me or somebody else to see if it's a quality question, because your interviewer is going to be judging you based on how you ask questions. So if you're asking them, well, what's the pay? That's not a good question to ask. This is your opportunity to know if you're really going to like the job or not. You should already know what the pay is based on your company research, based on your industry research. So something that's more appropriate are, what are the typical hours? So maybe they have first, second, and third shift. Maybe they don't. Maybe, the situation is different. If that hasn't come up already, that might be something you want to know. Do you have steady work year round? Let's face it, in Chicago, it gets cold. You might have to travel someplace else to get work during the off season. So if they say, no, work isn't steady year round, you may be willing to have that job during this season, but then during winter, you might have to travel further south and go someplace temporarily to do work to sustain yourself and your family. Another question might be, what makes someone successful at this company? This is a great question. This shows your initiative. This shows that you're curious as to how to be a great employee. And this answer is going to give you insight into the company culture. Another fantastic question is, what do the next steps look like? Or may I have your contact information to follow up? So next steps are important because, okay, well, what's next? Is there another interview? Will you hear back in a couple of weeks? You need to know how to proceed forward, how to how to follow up. Maybe they say, yeah, we're doing some more interviews. In about 2 weeks, you'll hear something. So that means that in 2 weeks, you put down in your calendar to follow up. And then you always want to have that person's contact information, because within 24 hours, you want to send a very brief but sincere thank you note to the person who took the time to interview you. This is going to make you stand out. Now, sometimes the person interviewing you isn't trying to give out their contact information. That's fine. They don't have to give you it. But then the recruiter who set the interview up, you want to make sure you send a thank you note, to that recruiter saying, thank you for taking the time to set this interview up. Please pass this thank you note along to Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so who interviewed me, and then have a very brief interview note. I'm going to go over all of this, further on as we go along. But definitely you want to have good questions to ask at the end of the interview. And then, we kind of just touched on it, post-interview etiquette. Send the thank you note within 24 hours. Follow up as instructed. If you forgot to get instructions, follow up the next week. Within 7 days, follow up. But don't follow up too often. If they say it's going to take 2 weeks, then follow up in 2 weeks. And if you don't hear anything at that point, then follow up 7 days later. And then maybe 7 days later. But after a month, if you haven't heard anything, if you're just, been essentially ghosted, then, put it to bed. You can only control what you can control. And so after following up 4 times, I just leave it alone. All right, guys. So that is a gist of interviewing. If you were able to catch this on the live session, this is where we're going to break out and start working on crafting some career stories for you. But if you're watching this on replay, then that means it is time to get started on your homework.